In my last video, I read out Jesus' dictation from the 25th of April 1948, where he gave an example of how Christians in the catacombs and in general in the early centuries operated to spread the Catholic faith, and how he wanted that to be an example for us today. And he was offering that example for the lowest Catholic, but every category of Catholic, all the way up to the Pope. This dictation involves me reading what Jesus says more specifically about Italy. But it's not just about Italy. What was true of Italy in 1948 is true of the entire Western world now. And it's a time in which we could do well to pay attention to what he says if we are to have any chance of recovery of the faith and recovery of the West. Because if this faith, the Catholic faith, does not re-enter the hearts of the peoples of the West, then the darkness will continue to descend. And that darkness which we have now, and it's dusk now, the darkness is really about to descend in a very thick, black way. Here's what Jesus continues saying in his dictation of the 25th of April 1948 to Maria Valtorta. To re-Christianize Italy and the world today, where you live, and where a doctrine that is worse than the false pagan religions of the past and the even falser religions of today has asserted itself. The doctrine that makes a God of man, abolishing any kind of respect for the divine, vaguely perceived but felt and worshipped by pagans and idolaters of every time and place. I think Jesus is speaking of communism here. He doesn't mention it. It is necessary to live that life, the true Christian life, as we read was lived in the earliest Christian times. See Acts 2:42, 45 to 47, Acts 4:32, Acts 6:2 to 4 and 7, and the apostolic letters, in which we clearly see the help of Christians in assisting the evangelization of the apostles and disciples, and the life of the clergy scattered among the people. And Jesus further cites scripture, 2 Corinthians 11:27, 1 Peter 4:7 to 9, 1 Peter 5:2 to 3, Jude verses 20 to 23. Just to give a few examples, he says. You can also read the Acts of the martyrs and saints. Jesus goes on. Learn from the church militia, from the priesthood, that priesthood which should be holy, i.e. heroic, unselfish, humble, contrite, pure, all patience and love, so as to block the insidious word of the enemies of the church, finding confirmation in your way of life. If the least of the flocks are separated from the holy sheepfold and follow infernal pastors, take the holiest, most willing, heroic, prepared to give up all and accept sacrifices, even martyrdom, and spread them, hidden like the vital elements in the air. The eye won't see them, but the earth, plants, animals, and mankind will benefit from them. Spread them throughout this land of Italy, to reclaim, then colonize, and finally to generously sow truth and justice. Why do you look to faraway lands to evangelize when your own country needs it? It is said, no one is a prophet in their own land. In truth, I tell you that you are the least of all. Pastors, you are blind because you do not see what is around you and do not know how to protect the people from evil. You seem to think that only idolaters, pagans, and even Christians who are not Catholics have been injured by the great wound. And so you run to them, trying to heal them and bring them alive by grafting them onto the mystical body. However, here in your own country, there are not just the lapsed pagans and idolaters. There are those without God, the antichrists and the satans. Don't you think that if their number increased further, they could severely damage the church, the papacy, and cut off the motor nerves of the great mystical body by destroying hierarchies, disorganizing and creating fear and confusion, and provoking a long, dangerous paralysis, which would be felt by all the living members of the mystical body, or those waiting for life from it? How long would the redemption of pagans be delayed? How many losses among the living members, if that happened? I have said, reclaim, cultivate, and plant. Whoever wants to reclaim land is not happy in areas that are ready to be sown. They go where stones, plants, and water have made the land sterile, tangled, and putrid. They clear it, shape it, burn it off, and clean it up. Then they cultivate it, which means start a civilized life where once there was a wild area. Finally, they sow the seed, plant, rear animals, and make fertile, rich and healthy, vast areas that were initially dangerous desert, and which become a civilized and populated area. Truly, much of the population is like that wild area. Bad, but not always because of the tendencies of the spirit. Haters, but not always because of the tendencies of the spirit. An enemy, but not always because of the tendencies of the spirit. 90 times out of 100, it is through ignorance. Bad, because they don't know the truth. Haters, because they don't know love. An enemy, because they don't know the church. And by church, I don't mean what we see in many cases in its ministers. It will be better they don't know that version. I say they don't know the church as I founded it, animated by my spirit, love, fraternity, and paternity. Oh, for that declaration by the pagans in the early centuries, which you don't hear anymore, or only very rarely. Quotes, "See how much they love and how virtuous they are. See how they love each other." Because of this authenticity of the clergy and Christians of the early centuries, the world of that time became Christian. Now, through the opposite situation, the world is returning to paganism, atheism, or Satanism. Take the holiest ones among you and spread them around. Pieces of yeast in a mass of dough. Spread them out, the truth among lies. Spread them out, the light amidst the darkness, created by Satan's servants on orders from their king. Spread them around, love where hate reigns. Exceptional times call for exceptional measures. I've been pointing them out to young Giovanni since 1943. Young Giovanni, as I've said before, being Jesus' nickname for Maria Valtorta. I've mentioned them both in the work and in other dictations, some of them recent, again, and repeat them now, only not as advice, but as a command. Much needs to be renewed if you want to save. You are not anchored. You are encrusted with habits formed over the centuries, but which are not those I gave my apostles and disciples, and about which the Paraclete continually advised the young church in order to help its development. The world is changing, not for the good, but it is changing. The church cannot stay still, but must not adapt itself to the bad evolution of the world, but transform itself in order to be able to confront the bad evolution of the world and correct it. It must remain unchanging only in dogma and doctrine. It has to adjust to the times in the ways it exercises its ministry. In times of turmoil and anti-Christian acts, what was sufficient in times of faith, peace, and reverential love for God and His church is no longer enough. That is why I tell you what David said to Ahimelech. That's in 1 Samuel 21:16 of the Vulgate, 1 Kings 21:5 of the Protestant versions. Quotes, "The vessels of my servants are holy. If our mission is unholy, it will be made holy through the vessels. That is, take my holy servants, and even if you put them in unholy places, what is holy will not be made unholy. On the contrary, whatever comes into contact with what is holy, that is my holy servant, will be sanctified. It is essential that the people turn back to me. It is useless to sing that Christ reigns in occasional gatherings, which could be judged as being provocative. Sing about Christ's reign with your life and your works. Establish it among the ignorant, the mad, and the sick in spirit, with the patient work of the masters of love and the spiritual doctors. Be doctors and teachers, not only for the good, but for everyone, as I was. Being priests must not constitute a special position, which gives honours and saves one from the punishment of mankind. Work, fatigue, poverty, and hunger. I was hungry, and I was God. I was fatigued, poor, and had to work, and I was God. I lived in danger. I didn't avoid it, and I was God. Take the holiest ones among you and spread them around. At the same time, in silence and in a hidden way, a mystic arm will help them with prayers, penance, and suffering. That of victim souls. Many Moses on the mountain while the Joshuas battle and win on the plains, using only the weapons of the gospel and a truly evangelical life. They battle and win with and for the gospel. Do it without delay. You don't know if you will still be able to do it in the future. In this land of martyrs and saints, that is Italy Jesus is speaking of, where the heart of the church is, why don't you do what they already do with success in other nations? For the love of God and in defence of the church, morality and Christian civilization, where there is always freedom and peace. I will continue this dictation in the next video.